Good morning. Can y'all hear me? No? Okay. Yes. Can you hear me through this, maybe? Not really?
We're going to project.
Is that better? No? Do I need to talk louder? Is that better? I'll just talk louder and turn this off. So.
They need it for the virtual.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good morning. We're excited to be here. I'm glad you're here today. I'm Anita Presley, and I'm joined this morning by Amy Huddle. We are both teachers at Mobile Christian School in Mobile. We also work part-time at a tutoring center that's basically designed to help students increase their ACT scores. Also, my administrators, and they've been very good about letting us have an ACT class during the school day, so we also tutor our students throughout the day. So they can take it as an elective, so that's helped us out some.
I would also like to welcome you. Thank you for being here. I teach history and social studies, but even though I'm a social studies teacher, I have worked to help learn strategies and develop strategies for our students in English and reading. So if you're not an English teacher or a reading teacher, it's okay. We're going to go over these things. I promise you can do this. We have set up a Google Classroom. If you have Google Classroom, you can go ahead and write this code down. This code will also be projected at the very end of the program. It is also included in the handout. I'm so sorry we ran out of our handout packets. Okay.
So this morning we want to share with you a few strategies. I guess if you're in here, then you're interested in at least teaching the English and reading part of the ACT. But these strategies are not designed to be covered in one session. If a student comes to you the day before the ACT and says, I need help on the ACT, you really can't help them. I mean, you can give them one little thing that might help them, but that's just too late. So since I do have an ACT class, I started my class in August, and I've encouraged them to take the December test, which is this Saturday. Some of us don't have that, I guess, freedom to have that much time with the students, and I've only had this class for a couple of years, so before they would come to me before school or after school, but even then it wasn't enough time. So you have to be dedicated to give the time. They have to be dedicated to kind of receive the time because they have to be there to do that. So we have months of practice, and really the big thing here is practice, practice, practice. So, okay.
It definitely is a commitment. It's a commitment from you as teachers and from the students. We know this in education. If they don't have buy-in, if they don't feel like it's worth their time, then often they don't get much out of it. So we try to encourage them with these strategies pretty much from the beginning. At least 1 month of consistent practice is where we start to see some noticeable changes in their English and reading scores. These are strategies that if you do have a dedicated class to ACT, that would be amazing. But if you're not, if you're just a classroom teacher, these are strategies that you could fold in to your normal class time. Yes, 1 month.
Okay, so before we get into the presentation, we're going to really talk about the setup of the actual English part. We're going to cover the English part first, then we're going to move to the reading part. But on this, for the English, there are 75 questions, and they cover 5 passages. Sometimes there are 14 questions per passage, sometimes 15, sometimes 16. But for the most part, it stays at 16 or 15 passages, 45 minutes, 5 passages. So we're not in the math class here, but 5 into 45 goes 9 times. So you have 9 minutes per passage to do it. We're going to review some basic grammar concepts. And this KISS, Keep It Simple Student, we're going to go with that because it really does help if there are a lot, and like I said, this is a lot that we're going to cover today. You can't cover this in a 30-minute session that a kid wants to come in and take the test, but this is going to take practice. So that's what we're going to do here is just cover some of this.
Another strategy that we use a lot is kitchen timers or simple timers, which of course a lot of classrooms you already use it for time management. Students don't often know what it feels like to take a test in that short amount of time. 9 minutes can feel like a long time or it can feel like a short time. Students start to kind of need to make that kind of mental muscle memory of what 9 minutes per passage feels like. We also always encourage our students to have their own timepiece. Obviously, we know in the ACT, smartwatches are not allowed, but even if they just have a simple digital watch, something that they can help monitor and pace themselves.
So we're going to go ahead and start looking at these strategies. The handout has passages in it from the Red Book. So I know y'all know what the Red Book is. It does actually have a name, but we always call it the Red Book. But this the official ACT prep guide. And so we're going to use the 19 MC5 for up here. We've loaded practice questions from the 18 MC4. Those are actual tests that were given in December and June of 2017, but they are in the Red Book that the students can purchase. Okay.
Okay, so we are going over some of these English grammar question types that we've noticed many students tend to struggle with. For us as adults, sometimes we even get caught up in this. Possession is something we have noticed is fairly common. We've also noticed that it really is usually pretty simple. Is it plural or is it singular? Does the apostrophe go on the inside or does it go on the outside? Once we tend to kind of review this with our students, it begins to make sense. When we look at this sample question, it says friends, houses. We're talking about multiple friends. That means it's plural. The apostrophe needs to go on the outside. The original answer choice doesn't have anything. We look at the choices we have. C is the only one that has the apostrophe on the outside. So this is also a concept. We can easily pull these questions into just a normal class day and help reinforce this concept. Who versus whom? This can be tricky for grown-ups. This is one of those things where you kind of have to think in your brain for a second, like, what am I doing here? So we've kind of tried to develop tricks for our students, and I hate to call them tricks, but strategies, whatever works. He and who sound similar, and whom and him with the two M's go together. When we look at the original question, it says, who assured myself? We're going to plug in he for who, he assured myself. So the he assured sounds good. That makes sense. That's logical. The myself is the one that gets weird. The only one that fixes that is J. And if it had been the opposite with whom, we would have plugged in him. Okay. Concise. This is where we keep it simple, student. Students sometimes are incredibly nervous when they come to you for ACT prep. They've seen the test, they've taken the test, maybe they've had ACT prep before, maybe they never have, and they feel like they need to make things fancy or more complicated than they really are. So this is a point where we can really relieve some of that tension for them and say, look, just keep it as simple as you can. That's that concise. We always tell them to consider their shortest answer first. It might not be right, but consider the shortest first. Plug that in, reread your sentence. If it makes logical sense, it didn't take away too much information, there's your answer. Moment is our shortest, and it's the correct answer. For the sake of logic, this is also another question type that children, students do not see out of a normal average class. When you're in social studies class, we're not asking you to move sentences around, but we do ask you to sometimes put things in chronological order. So this is a skill that you could back up into a social studies class or another class that deals with timelines. So in this case, it says sentence 3. They're always going to give you a clue on the ACT if they're asking you to move a sentence somewhere. In this case, they gave us a year. When we scan the rest of that paragraph, we see we've got 1940, we've got 1941. Our sentence that we're moving has 42, so it's logical for it to go after the 1941. That is sentence 4. These are my favorite questions. And I know it's silly to have favorite questions, but this is one of them. This is another question type that students do not see in a normal class setting. So when they get to the ACT for the first time, this type of question, just knowing how to approach it sometimes freaks them out a little bit. But this question tells you exactly what you're looking for. There's really not a lot of thought into it. Once students get to see it and practice it, they realize this is actually a really easy question for me. Don't be afraid of it. This question says, what types of songs? And it even says specify. You only have 2 options that actually mention songs, B or C. We've already read through the rest of the passage by this point. It's all about Hawaii, so the most specific choice is B. Just match it up. This is another question type that kids are like, oh, I don't like the big questions. The big questions at the end scare me. It's okay. These are pretty few. You only see maybe 2 or 3 of these at the very, very end of your test. This, whenever you see primary purpose, think main idea. In the question stem, they're going to give you a partial or possible portion of the main idea. Always refer back to your title. If they don't have a really good memory of what they've just read, tell them, go back and double check your title. Go back to the very beginning. Look at your title. In this case, they're asking, is an important invention? Yes, we've got it right there in the title, the spectrum. We know it's about Hedy Lamarr, so that gives you to the 2 yes options. The best one is F. Okay. No repetition. This is another where we get to reinforce that keep it simple, student. Do not overthink this. Do not repeat any additional information. It's already been stated. We don't need it. The ACT doesn't need a word count. Kids do. They don't. So she had ideas of her own. We've already stated that. So we're going to start with the shortest. In this case, 1, shortest. It's our answer. So keep it simple. Look for the odd man out. Subject verb, this is a concept that, once again, you can really reinforce this in your classroom. And I know that that feels kind of simple. You're looking at high schoolers. They should know subject verb. They don't, okay? They get this mixed up all the time. Also on the ACT, they don't tend to put those subject verbs right side by side like what they've been used to in grammar classes. They might put some prepositional phrases or some extra information between that subject and verb. So what we've noticed is that if you're ever looking at subject or verb, it is almost always plural or singular. Plural or singular. So you're looking for the odd man out. If the correct answer needs to be singular, you're going to have 3 plural choices and 1 singular. That odd man out, that's your answer. So you almost don't have to go back and go for all the grammar skills behind it. This one, commas are incredibly common, and we have included a comma handout. So if you have our Google Classroom code, that has our handout that we've created with some sample questions on there as well. That is something that we constantly have to go back to. So even if we've already started a program with a student, or maybe they've already been in class with us, going over ACT, we always have to review commas. There's just so many different ways that they can see it. So easiest thing, it's an interrupter. This one has however. It could be, for example, therefore, who knows, there's a whole laundry list. Always set it off with commas. The answer choice that does that is the original one.
Like Amy said, commas are very important, and they are very scary because students are taught, put a comma there, and that's what they want to do. They will comma that test to death. So we are going to teach them, yes, you're going to need commas, but let's know when to use them. So if you have 2 adjectives and you can put the word and between it, like these stitches are tiny and tight, and I always tell them, like, I will say something like the big hairy dog. Is the dog big and hairy? Yes. And then we'll talk about a dirty skating rink. Is the rink dirty and skating? No. So you wouldn't put a comma between those, but the and, tiny and tight stitches, you would need that comma. Now I also see a comma after stitches. So on the ACT, a comma conjunction lets me know that a sentence is coming. Well, this is comma and, that's your conjunction. But just for right now, how many of you in here are English teachers? Okay, so most of you. So, all right, so several complex techniques, that's not a complete sentence. So I would not do a comma after stitches. I do need the comma in between tiny and tight, but not the one after stitches. So my answer choice then would be H. Okay, so dashes. Dashes are not taught a lot in grammar classes. I teach grammar. I don't teach it a lot, but a dash works in a pair. If you have in the middle of a sentence, if you have a dash, you need another dash. You can't take a dash and mix it with a comma or a parentheses. It's dash, dash. The tricky part is sometimes we'll have dashes at the end of a sentence, and that's okay because a period trumps everything. But in the middle of a sentence, if you see a dash, I tell them, look to see if your answer choice has a dash. If you have an answer that has a dash in it, that's probably it. But don't just choose it. Look at it, make sure. Devices that operate wirelessly function, and the next one has, it's the wrong verb, but of course they'll fix that in number 26. But and so we're going to leave out cellular phones, wireless internet networks, and global positioning system. That we can leave out. That's an interrupter, so I would go straight with B as my answer choice there. Okay, the next one is we're going to ask about the preceding passage as a whole. So we want to add in this sentence, enter rock climbers. So I tell them, you don't have to look all over the passage. Just look at your answer choices. Your answer choices gives you paragraph 2, 4, 5, or 6. You don't have to look at paragraph 1 or paragraph 3 because it's not an answer choice. So, but I would go to where I first start talking about rock climbers because it says enter rock climbers. This is our first discussion on a rock climber. So we would find that in the reading which says rock climbers are comfortable. That's the first time we mention rock climbers. We're going to put that there in paragraph 2. Okay, the next one is pronouns. These are tricky because it's rare that they know what a noun is. And then to throw in a pronoun on top of that, it's a lot of information, but we just tell them to be very, very clear. So here it's these layered stitches are applied to its surface. I want to be very clear about the surface. What surface? The surface of what? So on this one, the only one that tells me the surface of what is my answer choice B, which is the surface of the fabric. It's very clear about what I'm talking about, the surface of the fabric. Okay. You have to have a complete sentence. After completing specialized training, I will ask sometimes, is this a complete sentence? And out of their nervousness, they'll say, yes. And I'm like, so if I walk into you and I say, okay, after completing specialized training, is that a sentence? And they're, oh, no, it's not. So they come in as nervous about making wrong just in practice. So I can't imagine what their nerves are when they're taking the test. They don't want to be wrong. So, but here just rock climbers become ideal rope technicians. That is a complete sentence. It is fine. We don't need to add anything else in that, still that keep it simple student. So we're going to keep this as is. And I tell them too, don't be afraid of a no change. You're going to see a no change about 10 to 15 times as your answer choice. And the English portion is the only one that has the no change option. So if it's really nothing wrong with it, then there's really nothing wrong with it. So this next one is, this is almost going back to what she talked about earlier with the odd man out. And so now we look at this and we see we have a possessive, a non-possessive, another possessive, and a possessive. So, or even, so the only one that's not possessive is G. And so these are idioms. Students do not know idioms. They don't know them. They have their own language, which we have no idea sometimes what they're talking about. They speak their own idioms that we are not familiar with. So the ACT will throw in some idioms that they're not familiar with, and this is centuries old, but slang is not okay. If they just, if it were to say whatever, of course, we would not choose that one. But on this one, centuries old, they've probably never heard that. They've probably never said it. So centuries old is the odd man out, so we'll go with that one. The next one is colons and commas. If you were to ask a student when should they use a colon, they'd say, oh, right before you start a list. And that is kind of true if you're in like 4th grade. But when they're trying to do this ACT that's not designed for 4th graders, you have to almost reteach what they learned in elementary grammar, that a colon comes after a complete sentence when you're trying to give extra information. Now, the tricky part of that is you can always also use a comma and you can use parentheses. So it's a constant, like when we talk to them, we're constantly saying, okay, but this is a colon, but you could also use a comma, you could also use parentheses. So, but here, when my sister left Chicago for college in California, I began carting my guitar around everywhere. That's a sentence. That's great. They're just wanting to add in, where did you cart this around everywhere? Well, I carted it to school, to work, to friends' houses. So I'm giving additional information. So it is okay to use a colon there. So it would be a no change. Okay, homonyms and vocabulary. Sometimes they're just going to be lost on these because vocabulary, they're going to use words outside of the norm. And they're going to use homonyms there, and there. They're going to use allusion, allude. They're going to use ones that they don't use in everyday conversation, and they don't write in everyday conversation, and they have no idea what these words are. So some of these you just have to say, you know what, you're probably going to miss this one, and that's okay. That's okay, because either try to figure it out, always guess. We tell them always, always, always make a guess answer. But if you don't know it, you're not going to all of a sudden be hit with some kind of lightning bolt that's going to tell you what the definition is. So warm, mellow tones accrued. If they don't know what accrued is, they might know distributed, they might know appeared. They may have heard the word issued, but they wouldn't know to use it in this sentence and in this way. So the answer is issued, but again, that's just something, there's so many words, we can't teach them every word. We're going to teach them, do the best you can with what you know. And you may miss this one, and that's okay. And I tell them, because they're so afraid of making a mistake, I'll tell them, ACT, when they score this, they have no idea who you are. They're not going to look at this and go, oh, my stars, she did not know what accrued meant. They don't know that. They don't care. So, so it's issued. Okay.
All right, this concludes our strategies for the English section. Once again, we do have a comma handout that has been loaded onto Google Classroom. We'll pop that code up again so you can write that down in case you didn't have a chance to. If you did get the handout, the Google Classroom code is at the top. That way you can see this presentation, you can see our handout, you can see that comma sheet, because we've noticed those are incredibly common.
So now we're going to move to the reading section. Now this one is, they are tired by the time they get here. They have worked through 75 English problems, 60 math problems. They've gone through about 2 hours of testing. They're tired. They are not fresh. And so whatever thought processes they had, they're starting to get really, really slow at this point. So we want to do the best we can with what we have, because they still have over an hour's worth of testing to do. So they got an hour to go. They're 2 hours down. So we're trying to help them just maintain to the end.
Good. When they have a break, we do encourage our students to please, bring a snack, bring a bottle of water. I know this is hard for them sometimes because they're little social butterflies sometimes, but to stay away from other test takers. Sometimes when they get together, their first little thing is to kind of have a little bit of a gripe session. That can lose their focus. That can stress them out further. They're trying to discuss questions that are on tests that are already done. We don't want them to worry about, well, how did they do on English? How did they do in math? Just kind of chill out for 15 minutes. Give your brain a break. When they get into this last half, because it's only about an hour, we need them to still remember the strategies we've already been practicing. Once again, practice and practice and practice kind of builds that almost like mental muscle memory. This is the endurance part. This really is almost like track. You've got to endure.
Yes, we have worked for about 5 years on developing some of these strategies. We've tried it all. We've tried to read first and last paragraphs. We've tried to read first and last sentence of each paragraph. We've tried to just go straight to the questions, read all the questions, and then start answering. But we've noticed in the last couple of years that the best strategy is the one we're going to talk to you about. And you may have some that you're like, no, this did not work for me. And not everything is going to work for every student. And I wish we had like all day to talk. We do not. But sometimes you have to adjust timing, and we're not really talking about that so much. But sometimes they just don't do well on a particular passage. And you say, okay, you know what? That's your 5-minute passage. You take 5 minutes here, that gives you 10 minutes on the other. But for today, we're going to just assume that they're all going to do well in their 8 minutes and 45 seconds that they've been allotted. So, but just know that not every student is the same. Some of them do well with some passages more than they do others. And you could give one student 25 minutes on one part, and they still aren't going to get them right. Make that, just say, okay, you know what? Take 3 minutes on that one. That gives you 11 minutes on the other. So you may have to adjust timing, especially if you have time to really practice and work with the student. If not, this particular section to me is one of the hardest, because they are so tired by the time they get here. Their mental capacity, it's just a lot going on in their heads.
What we have noticed is that sometimes students come in with reading strategies on their own. You also have a lot of students, and we've all had these students, they come in and they do not think they're a good reader. They'll even tell you, I'm a bad reader. I've had kids say, I can't read that. So one of the things we always encourage them, especially once we get to this strategy, is we can work around that. This really isn't about reading per se. This is not an English class. You don't get any points for reading it. You have a limited amount of time. Let's see how we can get as many correct questions as we can in that window. That's the whole goal. ACT will never give them a single point based on you sat there and you read that whole passage. Thank you. Nope, we're going past it. So this method is what we call the seek and find method, where we basically start with a question and then go from there.
So the basic strategy is don't read the whole passage. We just start by reading the little blurb that's at the top. And I will tell you this, I will practice with a student. And at the very last, I'll say, did you read that blurb? They go, no, we forgot. So even though in our best practices, they're still, when they get to that test, but it needs to be almost like second nature. Read the blurb. It's going to help somewhere along the line. So what we'll do is we'll go straight to the questions, and then we will use that seek and find method. We'll use words from the questions to find words and match them up from the passages. So if a question refers to the passage as a whole, we're going to save that question, not to the very end, but within that 8-minute and 45-second. Like, we don't want to omit anything, because just like they don't get any points for reading, they also don't get any points for omitting. So you want to at least give them a 25% chance of getting this question correct. But this is like, they're time wasters. Those time wasters are on there for a reason. If they cannot, and time wasters are going to vary from student to student. Maybe they ask about the passage as a whole, they're like, okay, I got it, I know what this is about. But maybe perhaps they need to get a little more familiar with the passage, then they can go back and quickly answer those passage as a whole questions.
Timing in ACT tends to be tight. Even some of our strongest readers, people who have amazing reading comprehension skills, will struggle. 8 minutes and 45 seconds is a haul. That is tough for grown-ups to read something that's 700 to 900 words or to answer any questions about it. That's why we really emphasize this seek and find method. If you are taking 35 minutes divided by 4, that's 8 minutes and 45 seconds. As she mentioned earlier, as we work with our students, we start to notice some students, their accuracy will increase if we manipulate that 8:45 a little bit. So if we teach them, they work with it, they realize they can get more accuracy if we kind of shift a little bit of time away from one passage and tack it onto another. So they don't have to just stick with 8:45. It really depends on the strength of that student. We also encourage them, before they go in, have a guessing letter. Have it. Use the same guessing letter every time you guess. You should never have to sit down and go, well, I've already used this one, I've already used that one. These are too many of this letter in a row. No, don't think that way. Have your guessing letter. If you know you need to move on, you're running out of your time, put that guessing letter in, move on. Because what will happen is they will sit there and spin their little baby wheels, and then they're robbing time from questions that they could possibly get correct. And when I tell you, you really have to work on them to move on. They don't want to. They don't want to give up. They've got to move on. They've got to stay within that 8:45.
And also, just kind of backing up what she's saying here, it really is a confidence thing that they have. They don't want to. They're like, if I just had 30 more seconds, I could figure that out. Well, 30 seconds is ticking away, and what it's doing is taking time from another passage that they could get to. So they really need to be focused in on that. We have got to move out of here in 8 minutes and 45 seconds. So when you do practice, that's why it's important they have that timer in front of them. And also, it takes a little bit of time to bubble in, so you want to make sure that you're leaving just a few seconds of time to bubble in. So, okay.
A few things that we have noticed that can be reinforced in, say, an English class, even if you have like secondary assignments within a social studies class, sometimes we bring in historical fiction. There are some literary devices that they will embed into a question that sometimes if they haven't had that reviewed, kind of throws them for a second. So first person or third person, metaphor, what do they mean by that? What is persuasive, descriptive, expository? These aren't really specific to like any one type of question in reading, but it's a concept that they embed to some of the questions that students have sometimes been thrown by. And they're like, wait a minute, what do they mean by that? So we try ahead of time to kind of reinforce those literary devices and strategies. Okay, so we are going to start with the first passage. Once again, we always encourage our students, take your passages in order. Unfortunately, we've had students who have taken them out of order. It has not always turned out well for them. So passages in order, questions don't have to be in order. When you look at that ACT answer sheet, that bubble sheet, there's absolutely nothing on that bubble sheet that tells them, oh, you're in passage 1, you're in passage 3, and that's a lot of kind of mental gymnastics for them to do on test day. So passages in order, questions don't need to be. Passage 1, here's our blurb. The title is Pride. That doesn't necessarily tell you too much about it. Sometimes in the blurb, it will really give you, what is this about? Who is this about? It can give you a little bit more. In this case, just make it a habit as part of their strategy, always read that blurb. Okay, some of our sample questions in reading, we really emphasize to our students, look at that question stem, look at it. In this case, it says based on the passage, we got it. It's obviously this passage. It could be assumed that the narrator, so this is about the narrator, gained knowledge to tell this story. Our narrator is first person. That's that concept we would have reviewed ahead of time. What does first person look like? First person is using I. So if they're talking about the narrator and it's I, let's go look for I. So we're practicing that skimming, scanning. Here's what we need to look for. Once we've found what we're looking for, we've got I, we know that's the narrator. They're talking about the experience, the story itself. It says, I'm not acquainted with the details. This person didn't live this. It wasn't their experience. But I can imagine when we look at our answer choices, the only possible answer that includes that is A. It's hearsay. Once again, sometimes in vocabulary, we want to kind of reinforce what these words mean. If you ever come across, we do this in class anyway, but if you come across a word and you're like, I don't think they're going to know what hearsay is, if it's in a practice session, try and reinforce it as you go. All right. So once again, we're just going to look straight to our question. The narrator speculates. If you come across a word, you're like, ooh, I saw a question mark on that little kid's face. Let's talk about speculate. The narrator speculates that whoever convinced Jansen to invest in a steam-driven car. So on this particular question, if you look at your answer choices, they've given us a little bit of a shortcut. We've got well-dressed, semicolon, wealthy, semicolon, elderly, semicolon, intelligent, semicolon. We can use that as a shortcut. We're going to start scanning for just those words before the semicolon and the steam-driven car. Once we find what we're looking for of who convinced them to do this, does it match any of our words that we're already looking for, we're going to read around that. Maybe a sentence or two above, sentence or two below. Once we find it, well-dressed and plausible looking, you may be sure. Well, the only answer choice that has that is A. When you read the rest of the answer choice, it fits with what you've got, what you found. Once again, just go straight to the question. The majority of the investment money to manufacture. Steam-driven cars has already been mentioned, so if you start looking for that, you might find it in several places, but money hasn't. So let's start scanning for money. Well, if you start to scan, you see that very first sentence, line 38, the bank put up the loan. Bank is money, loan is money, and then it actually says money. As we keep reading, it said he also dipped improperly into bank funds. The only choice that gives us that is C. It came from the bank.
Okay, so the next passage that they will get that day is the social science, and again, we do not encourage them to skip around. Their brain is tired, so they just do not have the mental capability sometimes to skip around and then to know which ones they skipped and do the counting, and the bubble sheets are tiny, and so it's just better if they work them in order. And if you need to mix the order up, just go ahead and just manipulate your timing. I would manipulate timing before I would skip around in the passages. So the problem here is they want to either not read or read too deeply. So the ones who come in who say they're bad readers or they don't like to read, they don't want to read it. And the ones who really like to read, they want to read and really dissect this. And they've been in classes that they say, okay, well, this means this and this means this. It doesn't mean anything. It's just matching. They don't want, and the ACT's been very upfront. They'll say they don't have to have any outside knowledge for these passages. But students think, oh, I have to know all about steam-driven cars before I can answer questions on it, but they don't. So on this blurb is a little bit helpful. First, it tells me it's a paired passage. which strikes fear in a lot of the students because now they have to be responsible for reading 2 passages instead of 1. But on this one, I know passage A is adapted from Plastic, A Toxic Love Story. So it's good, bad. It's toxic, but they love it. So it's a good, bad thing. And passage B is adapted from American Plastic, A Cultural History. So I know this is going to be some sort of history about plastics. I don't have to wonder, is this going to be about dinosaurs? Is it going to be about some kind of sea creatures? Is it going to be it's a person? It's about plastic. So this blurb at least keeps me on track. I know this is going to be about plastics. Okay, so first one says, the main idea of the second paragraph. So we've loaded the second paragraph up here, and we want to see what it's talking about. There was another reason designers embrace plastics. Well, this is telling me about why they like plastics. And it talks about line 20. It says it needn't cost a lot of money. They could be things of beauty. They can get the most of the best to the most for the least. So it's still money. Oh, goodness. Okay. So they were the ideal medium for that. They were inexpensive. And we have just been told we have 5 minutes, so we're going to move. So it provides low cost. So it is F. It mentions cost. Here it says passage B. I'm going to go straight to passage B. I'm not even going to look in passage A because none of my answers are there. It says plastic toys broke. They broke on Christmas morning. It says, so I'm going to look for the word toys. It's going to tell me where toys are. So I'm going to see that they're less durable and less destructive because they're not going to scratch the furniture. So next one is, it says, one bias the public held in the post-war years. I'm going to look for the word post-war years. It says both passages. That means I don't have to look in both of them because it tells me already. It's a hint. It's already in both passages. So I'm just going to find one that has it. It has it here in passage A, and it says post-war years. And it tells me that they melted, they cracked, they grew clammy. So they're inferior substitutes. They're not good. So that's D. All right, the next one is our humanities passage. Cover quickly.
Students always ask, what is humanities? It's a story about humans. Don't worry about what it is. Keep on trucking. They're going to be like, oh, okay. The title on this one gives you a hint. It tells you it's about a Colombian writer, and it gives you a name. And so you're going to see this name quite a bit. Read the blurb. The strategy is still the same. Look at your question stem. Look and see what it's asking you about. It says the author's opinion. As we scan through, we're looking for the author. What does the author say about him? How does he describe him? He describes him as gifted and hardworking. It's almost word for word. It's F. Once again, favorite question. Grandmother, we know that if you look at your answer stem, it says according to Garcia. Well, he's all through the passage. We already know that from our title. So we can't keep scanning for him. This question is really about grandma. So let's start scanning for grandmother. We're scanning for grandmother. Once we get to grandmother and we read that sentence or two around her, she told stories that were fantastic because she thought they were true. The only answer choice that includes that information is G. This is another question. We've got comments about Garcia and his fame. So we're going to look for that word fame, fame, fame. As we scan, there's fame. Even the word, he said it was witty. He laughed about his fame, gratitude. Answer choice says gratitude is C. Okay. This is a really important type of question for the ACT. They love to give you a line or a paragraph. And the one thing we really always emphasize to our students, that's not the only thing you read. Please make sure you're going to have to read around it, be ready to read around it. When it talks about something better, when you read above it, it talks about the life he could have had if he'd stayed where he was from. In this case, the passage author indicates that Martin's biography, once again, it mentions Garcia again in that question. If you're constantly scanning for Garcia, Sugar Lump, you're going to find that a lot. Let's find something else to look for. So Martin's biography is something we can scan for. It's right there at the beginning of this paragraph, line 78. As we scan through that information, Martin's biography is dark. We've already had a question that talks about how happy and cheerful Garcia is, so there's where you go. It's the balance.
All right, we're going to go through this. Natural science very quickly. These are easy, easy, easy. They're my favorite ones to find. Our place in the universe. We are humans. Our humans' place in the universe. Where are we going? So it helps me out here. The main function of the first paragraph, read the first paragraph. And so it says it's the increasing scale of our maps. It doesn't mention really all this other stuff. So basically how humans, we're humans, our sense of our surroundings has expanded over time, so H. There again it says one similarity among the ancient models of the universe in 6 through 18, it says, but again, that's going to be similar again. So it says there was no estimate of its size. It says that in B, there's no scientific estimates of its size. The next one is the main idea of the last paragraph. They got to kind of scan quickly, kind of like what we're doing right now. So nothing in our experience allows it. So it says that in F, nothing in our experiences allows it. So quick. They won't go this quick, but we can now. Early Greeks, we're going to look for early Greeks really quickly. It says they viewed Earth as a circular plane. Go look. Oh, my stars. There it is in A. Circular plane with the ocean developing it. And they just kind of read it word for word. And it says, according to the passage, excellent, go. All right, the next one is, this will take you a minute. This is a very long paragraph. This might be one you want to teach them to skip, because that's going to take a minute. So we're going to skip that sucker and move on. But it is actually, they're going to look for something with the camels, so it's J, camels. All right. Greeks in the solar system, we're going to look for the word solar system. Okay, so we have it in line 51, but it says that discovery had to wait for the invention of the telescope. It's two lines down from the solar system, but there it was. The telescope was invented. Isaac Newton, again, find Isaac Newton. This right here, it's important that they read what's in parentheses. Sometimes that is an answer choice, and it is on this one, so it's less acknowledged, J. So, thank y'all very much. We could talk, as you can see, for hours about this. Join our Google Classroom. We have our handouts on there, and you can look at those. Thank y'all very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you again.